City lights pressed against the glass walls like distant, silent witnesses. Inside the 42nd floor dining room, the celebration glowed bright to bright, casting long shadows across linen tables and polished silver. Laughter rose in warm waves, bouncing off marble floors and tall mirrors. Guests came dressed in confidence and wealth, each one eager to honor the man at the head of the long table. Damon Kellen, Billionaire CEO, praised as a visionary of modern dining. Amara slipped between chairs with a steady grace learned from long shifts. Her black uniform blended into the background. Her steps made no sound. To most guests, she was a quiet figure who carried plates and vanished, but the menu on her arm, heavy, leather-bound, edged with silver, refused to stay silent. She paused at the side station to restack a pile of menus. Jazz murmured in the background, soft and polite. A breeze from the air vent stirred the corner of the top menu. She pressed it, flattened, saw a line she had never noticed before. Her eyes locked. The letters were gold, thin and cruelly calm. Malachi's Sunday stew from the personal family archive of Damon Kellen. Everything else fell away. The music faded. Voices thinned. The room seemed to narrow to that single line of text, glowing on the page like a warning. Malachi. Her father's name. A memory surged forward, her father stirring a pot on a quiet Sunday. Steam rising, apron strings wrapped twice around his waist, his voice gentle but full of pride. This stew tells our story. One day, people will know our name by its taste. Yet here, on the most expensive menu in the city, his name lived under someone else's story. A guest at table 12 cleared his throat. "Miss, may we get our menus?" Amara blinked back to the present. She walked over, placing menus one by one. Each touch felt heavier, as if the leather carried the weight of something stolen. When she reached the last guest, her fingers tightened around the final menu. She could not hand it over. The gold letters pulled at her again. Malachi's Sunday stew from the personal family archive of Damon Kellen. The words tasted wrong. They felt like a locked door she suddenly had the key to. From the center of the room, the board chair raised a glass. "A toast to Damon," he announced, "for his originality, his unmatched vision." The word originality hit her like a cold wind. Amara's pulse quickened. She looked across the hall at Damon Kellen. Perfect smile, perfect suit, surrounded by applause. Cameras aimed at him. Everyone waited for him to speak. A fellow server brushed past her and whispered, "Stay in your section. Don't cause trouble." But trouble was already in her hands. She clutched the open menu, the page with her father's name exposed like evidence. Every step toward the CEO felt both terrifying and necessary. Her father's voice echoed from memory. "Once someone steals your recipe, they steal your story too." The applause reached its final beat as she arrived beside Damon's chair. "Excuse me, sir," she said. No one noticed. Glasses clinked. She tried again. Louder. "Sir." The clinking stopped. Heads turned. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Damon looked up, mild irritation flickering in his eyes. "Yes?" he asked, smiling for the cameras even as the smile strained. Amara lowered the menu so the gold letters faced him. Her hand did not shake. "Sir," she said, her voice steady, "that's my father's name on the menu." Silence swept the room like a sudden storm. Chairs stilled. A server holding a champagne bottle stopped mid. Even the jazz seemed to shrink into the walls. Across dozens of tables, eyes widened. And then, slowly, Damon Kellen's practiced smile slipped just a fraction as he turned fully toward her. Applause cracked through the room like a bright flare, lighting every corner except the one where Amara stood. The dining hall shimmered with polished wealth glass walls, gold light, and tables arranged with perfect symmetry. Every fork pointed the same direction, every napkin folded like a promise. This was Damon Kellen's world, a world built to look flawless from every angle, but perfection often hid the deepest cracks. Amara kept her eyes steady as she moved through the room. Her uniform was simple, black shirt, black apron, name tag small as a whisper. It made her nearly invisible among the guests dressed in silver cufflinks, diamond bracelets, and tailored suits that looked untouched by real life. The contrast was sharp, almost painful. Their world floated. Hers stayed grounded. At the head table, Damon Kellen rose to speak. The soft lights hit his suit just right, casting a halo effect the photographers loved. His posture was calm, confident, almost rehearsed. He carried himself like a man who believed the world belonged to him, and most days it did. "Tonight," he said, voice warm and smooth, "we celebrate the future of this company. Our best year yet." Applause erupted again, louder this time. Amara stood near the side wall, holding a tray of empty glasses. From where she watched, Damon looked like a statue carved to represent success. But something beneath that polished smile felt hollow, like a locked door she had just opened by accident. Her fingers brushed the menu tucked under her arm, the same menu with her father's stolen dish glowing in gold ink. The leather felt heavier now, as if it carried a truth too large to hide. The jazz band played a soft, steady rhythm. Guests leaned toward each other, whispering compliments about the food and the decor. A man near the bar said, "Only Kellen could design a menu this original." The phrase made Amara's stomach tighten. She looked out over the hall. Everywhere she turned, the restaurant showcased Damon's name in the banners, the stage, the menu covers, but none of them told the truth about the dish that had built her father's dreams. A manager, hands clasped behind his back, stepped close to her. His voice was low but firm. Whatever happened at the table earlier, let it go. Tonight is not the night for drama. She nodded out of habit, but the words slid off her like water as she walked past the tables. She noticed guests raising their glasses toward Damon with admiration. Their praise felt sharp, like tiny needles pushing against her silence. The noise, the lights, the smiling faces, everything seemed to argue that she should stay quiet, blend in, disappear. But her father's name on that menu did not disappear. It blazed in her mind. She glanced at Damon again. He laughed with a board member, shoulders relaxed, as if nothing unusual had happened, as if he had not just been confronted with the truth in front of his entire company. The room glowed for him. For her, it flickered. She set her tray down and rested one hand on the back of a chair to steady herself. A server passing by whispered, "Don't, they'll fire you." Maybe, but the truth pressed harder than fear. The dining room applauded again as Damon ended his speech with a wide, confident smile. He raised his glass. Guests followed, toasting the man they believed in. Amara watched him, the menu still at her side like a quiet witness. The applause faded into soft murmurs. She took a breath, and despite every warning, every danger, every rule telling her to stay silent, Amara decided she would speak again. The memory rose like heat from a stove sudden warm, impossible to ignore. Amara stood near the service hallway, but her mind slipped years backward, pulled by a single thread, her father's apron strings, wrapped twice around his waist, tied with a careful knot he called the knot of patience. He always said good food required patience. So did Justice. She could still picture the small kitchen of their old apartment. The counters were chipped, and the window stuck half open, but her father cooked in that space, as if it were a palace. The air was always filled with soft sounds, wooden spoons scraping the bottom of a pot, simmering broth popping in tiny bursts, her father humming a tune only he seemed to know. And always, the scent of his Sunday stew. That stew was more than food. It was the story of where he came from, the story he hoped to pass on. He taught her each step with careful hands. "This dish carries honesty," he told her. "Every ingredient has a purpose, just like every person." She had believed him with her whole heart. But dreams, her father said, needed more than recipes. They needed courage, money, and someone willing to take a chance. So when he met a young businessman promising partnership and investment, he thought the door to his restaurant had finally opened. Amara remembered his excitement, how he stayed up late polishing his recipe cards, how he practiced his pitch in the mirror, how he tied and retied those apron strings as if preparing for battle. The businessman took copies of her father's recipes for review. Her father handed them over with trust. Weeks passed, then months. When her father reached out, the calls went unanswered. The business address he was given belonged to an empty office suite. The emails bounced back. The man was gone, and with him, every recipe her father had ever written. She still remembered the night her father realized what had happened. He sat at the kitchen table long after the stew on the stove had grown cold. His hands rested on the apron strings in his lap, fingers worrying the knot until it loosened. "They were all I had to give," he whispered. She had never seen him look so small. From that night on, he cooked the stew less often, and when he did, he never hummed. The joy faded from his eyes, replaced by a quiet hurt he carried the rest of his life. Amara blinked. Returning to the present now, she knew exactly where those recipes had gone. On a luxury menu, in gold letters, under Damon Kellen's name. Her chest tightened. The restaurant lights glowed at the edges of her vision, but none of their shine reached her. She felt the same knot her father used to tie only. This one twisted in her throat. She thought of the apron strings again, faded from washing, soft from years of use. She still kept them folded in a drawer at home. They were the last piece of him she could hold. And tonight, as she stood in a building worth billions, surrounded by people celebrating a man who had stolen the heart of her father's life work, she understood something new. Silence had protected the wrong person. Her father's story had been buried. His dish had been taken. His name had been used without honor. And she had spent years avoiding this truth because it hurt too much to face. But not anymore. Her fingers brushed the leather menu at her side, the stolen legacy that had finally shown its face. The confrontation waiting for her wasn't just about a recipe. It was about a promise she owed her father, a promise tied with apron strings. She drew a slow breath, the knot inside her tightening, not with fear now, but with strength. This, she realized, was long overdue. The first sign of danger was not Damon Kellen's voice. It was the way his smile stopped moving. For a moment he stayed perfectly still, as if someone had pressed pause on the entire room. The guests watched him. The lights caught the edge of his glass. The soft jazz kept playing, to calm for the storm that was coming. Amara held the menu open between them. Her father's name stared back in gold print. Damon blinked once slowly before forcing a polite laugh. "I'm sorry," he said, tone light. "I think you're confused." The words landed like ice water. Amara didn't move. She didn't lower the menu. She didn't retreat the way some servers would have. She stood her ground, steady and quiet. "I'm not confused," she said. "That's my father's name, Malachi Reed." A few guests shifted in their seats, sensing tension but pretending not to. Polite society loved a good show as long as it didn't stain their clothes. Damon leaned back in his chair, adjusting his cufflinks. His body language changed piece by piece. First, the relaxed shoulders stiffened. Then the easy charm faded from his face. Finally, he set his glass down with a soft tap that sounded louder than it should. "Miss," he said, lowering his voice, "this recipe is from my family's collection." His tone was smooth, but the space between each word sliced the air. Amara felt her pulse in her throat, in her wrists, in the menu she held. But she didn't break. She remembered her father's apron strings. She remembered the knot of patience and sometimes justice. "My father made this stew for 30 years. I grew up helping him. I know every step." Damon's jaw tightened. "Many stews are similar," he replied. "Perhaps it's coincidence." Coincidence, the word felt like a locked door slamming in her face. Nearby, the manager stepped forward, panic in his eyes. "Sir, I'll escort her." Damon lifted one hand, stopping him. No rage, no scene, just silence so sharp it made the nearest guests hold their breath. He looked at Amara again. "If you believe there is some misunderstanding," he said, "you may speak to our HR department tomorrow." HR is meant to lose people like her. Amara shook her head. "This isn't a misunderstanding. My father's recipes were stolen." The last word echoed. Stolen. A board member cleared his throat. Another pretended to check her phone. Others stared at their plates, trying to avoid becoming part of the story unfolding before them. Damon lowered his voice until it was almost a whisper. "Be very careful with accusations in public. There are legal consequences." The threat sat between them like a cold shadow. But Amara didn't step back. "There are consequences for stealing, too," she said quietly. Damon's hand froze on the stem of his glass. It was brief, just a flicker, but it was real. A quiet freeze, small enough for most people to miss. Not Amara, not the executives seated around him. One of them, sharply dressed woman with a tablet beside her plate, sat up straighter. Another leaned close to whisper something into his ear. A third narrowed his eyes, studying Amara as if calculating risk for the first time tonight. Damon's perfect image cracked not from panic, but from calculation. There was something in his gaze she had not seen before, recognition he knew. She saw it clearly. Damon forced a thin smile, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. "We'll continue this conversation privately," he said. But the executives around him exchanged glances, subtle, tense, and unmistakably alert. Something was wrong behind those looks, something dangerous, and as Amara stepped back, still holding the menu like evidence, she noticed one executive slip away from the table, phone already in hand. The confrontation had only begun. The truth didn't roar its way into Amara's life. It slipped in quietly like a door left open in a room she thought was locked forever. On her small kitchen table, under a single lamp, Amara laid out the one thing she trusted most, her father's weathered recipe card. The edges were soft from years of use. The ink had faded in places, but the handwriting, steady, hopeful, still carried his voice. This card was her compass, and tonight it pointed her toward answers. After the confrontation in the restaurant, she had gone home with a tightness in her chest that wouldn't loosen. The world outside her window kept moving, cars, lights, people, but she felt anchored to one truth. Damon Kellen had lied. The question was how deep that lie went. She opened her laptop, clicked into old email accounts she hadn't touched in years, and searched for anything tied to her father's name. At first, all she found were grocery receipts and old family photos. Then, buried under messages from a decade ago, she found a strange email. Contract review, Malachi Red partnership. Her breath caught. She opened it. Inside was the thread between her father and a man named Jonathan Pike, someone she didn't recognize. Pike had written excitedly about presenting Malachi's recipes to Damon for a potential early investment. Damon, her pulse jumped. This wasn't a random thief. This wasn't a stranger. This was someone connected to Damon Kellen long before the CEO became a household name. Her eyes scanned every line. The conversation was clear. Her father had shared his recipes with Pike under the promise of a partnership, a small restaurant, a shared dream. Then came the message that made her hand shake. Damon wants exclusive rights to the stew, claims it could anchor his future brand. Future brand, her father's dreams serving as someone else's foundation. Amara swallowed hard and clicked through attachments. Most were corrupted, but one file opened a draft contract. Her father's signature wasn't on it, but Pike's name was typed at the top. The language was sharp, predatory, wrapped in legal terms designed to trap someone without resources. Her father had backed away. Pike and Damone had walked off with everything. She sat back, heart pounding. The recipe card on the table seemed to glow under the lamplight, as if urging her forward. She needed more. She searched Damon's early business filings. Most were polished public documents, but one link led to an old website archived years ago. Hidden in its outdated bio was a reference. Kellen's first major inspiration came from a talented home chef he once collaborated with. No name, no credit, but she knew who it was meant to be. The deeper she dug, the more cracks appeared in Damon's carefully crafted story. Then she found something unusual, a login portal for former project partners linked to the archived site. Most of the pages required passwords, but one folder had been left open by mistake. Her cursor hovered. She clicked. Dozens of files appeared: budgets, drafts, internal discussions. Her eyes scanned faster and faster until she found a document titled Memo, Ownership Clarification. Sunday stew. Her chest tightened. She opened it. The memo was written by someone on Damon's early executive team. The language was simple, cold, and impossible to deny. Recipe originally sourced from Malachi Reed, confirmed, not part of formal contract. Decision: proceed with rebranding under Damon K. Narrative for consistency. Amara covered her mouth. They had known from the start. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't coincidence. It was a choice, a deliberate one. She reread the line again and again, feeling the weight of every word. Her father, who had tied his apron strings with pride, had been turned into a silent footnote in someone else's empire. The lamp flickered as she printed the memo, her father's recipe card beside the printer like a witness. When the page slid out, she lifted it gently, as though holding something fragile and powerful. The truth was no longer hidden. And with this memo in her hand, Amara knew Damon Kellen's entire story was about to crack. The elevator doors shut with a metallic thud, sealing Amara in a rising box of silence. It felt less like a ride upward and more like being carried into the center of something cold, something designed to trap light, not let it out. She clutched her folder to her chest. Inside it lay the memo she had printed the night before, the memo that proved Damon Kellen's company had taken her father's recipe and buried his name. A manager had approached her that morning with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Kellen would like to speak with you privately," he said. "Just a calm conversation." Calm conversation. It sounded gentle on the surface, but the tone behind it felt like a warning wrapped in silk. The elevator pinged. The doors opened to a carpeted hallway quieter than any part of the building she had seen. Her footsteps barely made a sound as she followed the manager past closed doors and frosted windows. At the end of the hallway sat a room with no glass walls, no city views, no natural light at all. The boardroom without windows. The manager pushed the door open. "He's waiting." Inside, the air felt still, almost heavy. A long table stretched through the center. Damon Kellen sat at the far end, two executives standing behind him like shadows. A single lamp cast a circle of light across a stack of untouched papers. Damon looked up with a polite expression shaped more by control than calm. "Amara," he said, nodding for her to sit. "Thank you for coming." She took a seat halfway down the table, close enough to face him, far enough not to feel cornered. Damon folded his hands. "I want to clear up what happened last night. You made a strong claim in front of many important people." He said it gently, but his eyes held a warning. Amara stayed silent. "One thing I value," he continued, "is fairness. If you believe there has been a misunderstanding about the stew, I want to hear your concerns directly." He offered a thin smile. "No need for emotion. Let's stay reasonable." Reasonable. A word that often meant choose silence. An executive stepped forward. "We don't want this to hurt your career," he added softly. "We can fix this quietly, without anyone else getting involved." The room seemed to press inward. The lack of windows made it hard to breathe, as if the walls themselves wanted her to surrender. Damon leaned in slightly. "So," he said, "tell me exactly what you think happened." Amara swallowed, feeling her father's recipe card in the folder, its rough edges resting against the incriminating memo. She met Damon's gaze. "I don't think," she said. "I know." The executive stiffened. "My father shared his recipe with your early partner. I found the emails. I found the draft contract." She paused, letting the silence sharpen. "And I found something else." Damon's fingers curled just slightly. "What exactly did you find?" Her heart pounded so loudly she could feel it in her palms, but she didn't look away. "A memo," she said. "Your team knew the stew came from my father. You chose to rebrand it under your name." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. The executives exchanged quick glances, tight, nervous. Damon's voice was slow, measured. "That's a very serious accusation. I hope you have something better than rumors." Amara opened her folder. Every sound in the room went still. Click of the folder, the slide of paper, the faint rustle as she pulled out the document that held the truth. She rose from her chair, walked forward 2 steps, and placed the memo on the glossy table. Then, with steady hands, she slid the incriminating page toward Damon Kellen, and the room swallowed the moment whole. The truth didn't leak, it detonated. By sunrise, Amara's story was on every major news site, each headline sharp as shattered glass. CEO Damon Kellen accused of stealing family recipe for company's signature dish. The article came from a well-known journalist who had called Amara at midnight, voice steady and certain. "If what you showed me is real," the journalist said, "the world deserves to see it." Now the world had. By evening, the restaurant that once shimmered with applause was surrounded by cameras and reporters. Security guards linked arms at the entrance, trying to block the rising rush of questions. Inside, the dining room felt different, quieter, heavier. The gold lights, once symbols of wealth, now reflected uncertainty across the glass walls. Amara stood near the back hallway, allowed to finish her shift only because the company didn't know what else to do with her. She checked her phone. New messages kept appearing: support, curiosity, warnings, even people who remembered her father's cooking years ago. But one message stood out. Shareholder meeting moved to tonight. Emergency session. Damon Kellen had lost control of the narrative. Upstairs, in the executive conference center, the shareholders gathered around a long table. Their expensive suits didn't hide the unease beneath them. Some paced, some whispered, some stared down at their phones, reading comments flying across social media. The memo Amara had exposed was already online, highlighted, shared, scrutinized. When Damon finally entered, phone in hand, he looked smaller than he had in any boardroom before. His silence wrapped around him like a too-tight suit. A senior shareholder tapped the memo with one finger. You told us this recipe was yours. You told the world it came from your family. His voice cut through the room. Was that the truth? Damon didn't answer right away. Downstairs, Amara waited in the staff lounge. The lights flickered above her. The room smelled faintly of coffee and stainless steel. She sat on a bench, hands folded. Her father's recipe card tucked safely in her pocket like a heartbeat. She didn't know what would happen, but she knew something had to change. Back upstairs, the questions grew sharper. A woman in a dark blazer stood. We are receiving calls from investors, donors, and legal teams. This is fraud, Damon. Clear fraud. Another added, if this is true, the company could face lawsuits, not to mention the ethical fallout. A third slammed a folder shut. Your entire brand is built on authentic legacy. If the centerpiece of that legacy is stolen, your credibility is gone. Damon lifted his chin slightly. We can handle this quietly, he said. We issue a statement. We call it a misunderstanding. No, someone snapped. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is theft. The room erupted. Voices clashed. Chairs scraped. The storm Amara had lived through privately for years was now tearing through the highest floor of the building. The shouting stopped only when a shareholder pointed directly at Damon and said, "This will destroy us unless you act right now." For the first time, Damon seemed to feel the full weight of what he had done. His shoulders sagged slightly. His hand trembled so faintly most would miss it, but his executives saw, his board saw, and down the hall, through the glass wall separating the spaces, Amara could see the faint reflection of the meeting. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see the moment Damon Kellen's face changed when arrogance cracked and truth pushed through. Something inside him shifted. He dismissed his team with a motion of his hand. Then he stood alone for a long moment, staring at the memo projected on the wall, the proof that he had knowingly taken another man's legacy. Finally, Damon walked toward the door, expression unreadable. Every shareholder watched as he reached for the handle. The decision he made next would decide everything. The first sound was not applause. It was the microphone clicking and a small, trembling sound that carried through the entire dining room. Damon Kellen stepped onto the stage with no spotlight, no music, no polished smile. For the first time since Amara had known his name, he looked human, shoulders lowered, voice unsteady, truth weighing on him heavier than any suit he'd ever worn. Guests filled the dining hall, but the energy was nothing like the glamorous night before. There were no raised glasses, no jokes told too loudly. Tonight, the room felt stripped down, honest, almost bare. On the tables lay a new menu draft. A blank space waited where Malachi's Sunday stew once appeared under the wrong name. Amara stood near the back, dressed in her usual black uniform, her father's recipe card wrapped carefully in her hands. She had come because the board insisted on a public statement. She stayed because her father deserved more than silence. Damon cleared his throat. "I owe you the truth," he said, voice steadying with each word. "Years ago I built part of this company on stories that were not mine." A ripple moved through the guests. "I took a recipe from a man who trusted someone connected to me," he continued. "A man named Malachi Reed." Her father's name filled the room like a slow, rising light. Damon looked down briefly, collecting himself. "I told myself it was harmless, that success excused shortcuts. But shortcuts cut people out, and in this case, they cut out a man who gave his life to his craft." The honesty was raw but controlled, like someone finally letting go of a lie that had exhausted him. He gestured toward the new draft menus. "From this day forward, the stew will appear under its true name, Malachi Reed's Sunday Stew." Cameras flashed. Some guests nodded. Others lowered their eyes, realizing they had praised a story built on someone else's silence. Damon continued, "Our company will also fund the Malachi Reed Culinary Foundation, supporting young chefs from underserved communities. His legacy will help others rise truthfully." The board chair stepped forward, placing a hand on the podium. "This is not charity," he said. "This is correction." Amara felt something inside her Lucina, not she had carried through years of unanswered questions. Damon turned and looked directly at her. The room followed his gaze. "Miss Reed," he said, "your courage exposed what we refused to face. You restored a story we tried to claim as our own. For that I offer both apology and acknowledgement." What belonged to your father now belongs to him again. The room fell silent, not tense this time, but full. Full of a collective breath finally released, Amara stepped forward slowly. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her father's name had been spoken in truth. At last. That was the voice she had come to hear. A staff member opened a glass display case near the entrance, newly installed, waiting for something worthy. Inside, a brass plate read, "In honor of Chef Malachi Reed, his story returns home." Amara stood before it, the dining hall, watching in solemn quiet. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the weathered recipe card. Just soft ink, faded, spirit strong. Her father's handwriting glowed gently under the lights. With steady hands, she placed the recipe card inside the display case. The glass closed with a soft click, a sound small enough to miss, yet powerful enough to restore a man's legacy. Truth had returned, and so had his name.